Hey there, this is David Wells with Netlify, and I'm going to walk through how to use Netlify and Intercom as an OAuth login provider. So you've probably seen this before on many of the web applications that you visit. Sign in with Facebook, sign in with Google, Twitter, etc. So what we're going to be doing here is actually setting this up with an Intercom account to add a connect with Intercom to our application. Under the hood, we're going to be using Netlify Functions to achieve this. This can apply to any OAuth provider out there. Let's take a look at how the Connect with Intercom flow works. Click the Connect button. Then I'm going to get prompted to OAuth with this application. So allow these permissions and then connect through. It will go ahead and give back the application a token to do stuff with those scopes that we saw in the last screen. It also gives back user data. If you wanted to use this for user management, let's say, you could do that as well. So that's pretty cool, but let's see how that actually works. So we connect with Intercom. That pings a Netlify function, the auth function. That'll redirect us through to that Intercom login screen. We go ahead and accept the permissions. That sends back an auth code to our auth callback function. And then that exchanges the auth code for an access token. And that access token is what we call the API with to give back the user data. And that's the access token that we can use to do things if we want to interact with the Intercom scopes that we got on that initial grant. So that's really how it works in a nutshell. It just has two Lambda functions running in Netlify Functions. You can see that in the source code of the project. This example application is using Intercom for OAuth, but this OAuth flow could be applied to any number of third-party softwares out there that offer OAuth. So we're using the simple OAuth 2 NPM package to do all that handshaking and what have you in two Lambda functions that it's probably around 200 lines of code. So take this if you want to use it with Intercom, or apply the same exact pattern for the OAuth provider of your choice. That being said, we're going to jump into how to get set up and rolling with Intercom as an OAuth provider now. After that, we're going to look into the actual source code and see how these two functions work. So if you're interested in that bit, skip ahead to the latter part of this video. The way that we need to set this up in the setup steps, after we have cloned everything down and installed it, we need to set up an Intercom OAuth application. And the way to do that is by logging into your Intercom account and then going into settings. And then down at the bottom of settings, there is a test version. So you can enable a test version of your Intercom account, and that will give you back your test application ID, which we're going to need in the later setup step. So once you have that, what you can do is go to developers.intercom.com, and this is where basically all of your different Intercom applications will live. What you're going to want to do is click into your dashboard here after you've enabled that test app, and then down at the very bottom here, you want to go into that test application. So inside of our test application, you can see an OAuth section. What we want to do is click into the OAuth section, and we want to fill out these values. So I've set up these values for the demo application. So if you scroll down here and click update, you can change the website URL. This is the URL you're going to want to use for your site. And then the redirect URLs, this is the callback function. And I'll walk through that in a second. And then any scopes and permissions that you want your application to have. And you basically make those changes and click apply for OAuth, and it will go ahead and update your test settings. If you're doing this for a production app, you have to submit a request to Intercom for them to give you an app. Once they have that, you basically go through the same flow to set that up. But the other values that you'll need, other than the app ID, which we can actually see in the URL here, is the client ID and the client secret. And where those need to be plugged in is if you're running this locally You want to set those secrets in your terminal session so you can just develop locally, or you want to set those inside of the Netlify build settings as well. So if we're using this one-click deploy to Netlify button and connecting through GitHub, and let's say this is 2, these are those values that you need. So the Intercom app ID, your OAuth client ID, and the OAuth client secret, which you get from that developer portal that we were just looking at here. So those are the values that you need. Once you plug those in and deploy, your application should work as expected. You might need to put in a dummy URL when you're setting this up initially because your site isn't created yet. You might not have, this Netlify URL or your own URL. If that's the case, just go ahead and put in a temporary URL and change that after your site's deployed, and Netlify gives you back a unique URL. Or if you change it, just make sure that you come back into this application in Intercom and update those values, and also update the values inside of your build settings inside of Netlify. And if you're curious where those build settings live, if you go into any one of your Netlify sites, click on the deploys link, go into deploy settings, and then underneath build environment variables. These are where those key value pairs that we were setting for the Intercom client ID, secret, etc. The key will be here, and the value that you put on site creation will be there. So if you need to update them, this is where you do it. Save the updates, and then you can trigger a new deploy on your site. So that's it for the setting up of the project. Let's actually jump into what the functions do. So we have the two functions, auth and auth callback. Let's actually look at the source code and see what they're doing and how they fit into that whole flow that we've seen. So if we jump into the project under the functions folder, there's those two functions, auth and auth callback. So if we look at our chart, the first function that we hit is this auth function. So if you go and take a look at the source code, what this is doing is it's just a simple Lambda function, and all that it's doing is generating an authorization URL using that simple OAuth 2 library and our client config. And then it is responding to the request with a location change of that authorization URI. This is basically how you do a redirect in a Lambda. This is a 302 redirect. You could do 301s, etc. But yeah, this is basically generating that URL and redirecting us through. Just looking at that one more time, we connect with Intercom. This is the authorization URI that's generated and we're redirected to. So this unique URL with the client ID as well as the redirect URL, etc. That's actually what's happening in that Lambda function right here. So let's go ahead and continue on with the flow. We've already redirected to our auth URL. Let's go ahead and OAuth and connect, give these permissions. So as you can see, we are redirected back to the auth-callback function with a code. And that's basically this step right here. So receive the auth code. The function has already done the exchange for the access token and return that back with the user data, because that all happens in the function. Let's take a look at that function right now. So here we are in the auth callback function. Again, it's a simple Lambda function with an event, context, and callback signature. We are reading the code from a query string parameter that we've been redirected to. That's this guy right here. And we go ahead and with that code, we use, again, the simple auth2 library to call into Intercom one more time and get back an access token for that code. Then we're just using a promise to get the user data. And then inside of our function, we're actually logging some stuff out. So if you view the logs inside of Netlify, you can see that. And then in this example, we're just returning a 200 response with these stringified results to the browser. So that's actually what we're seeing here in your application, you'd probably save this data and do something with the user information. But that is what it's doing in a nutshell. Yeah, again, in the simple OAuth 2 library, we just give it the configuration values that we need. In this case, again, that intercom app ID, the client ID, and the client secret, which is pulling in from the environment variables, either locally or from Netlify's build. And it basically generates an auth instance for us and does all that handshaking. So again, that flow with the code, that's the query string parameter, that's what's sent back. The auth callback takes that code, that's the query string, and goes ahead and calls back into our intercom and gets the access token back, and then we actually make another call to get the user data. But that's really it in a nutshell. With that token, we can do everything with the scoped permissions that we've allowed, and that is basically how the functions themselves work. And you can run all this stuff locally if you clone down the project and npm start. But yeah, as we can see, this is 47 lines of code to do that, handle that auth callback and get the access token, and the actual auth generating that redirect is about 25 lines of code. So super simple way to use Lambda functions and Netlify functions to set up an OAuth flow, where now we can use Intercom or any other OAuth provider to do interesting things with. I hope you enjoyed watching this. If you have any questions, feel free to tweet at me at David Wells. Comment on the video or comment on the corresponding blog post where you might have seen this. Until then, keep spreading the jam.